to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to the Talent Optimization Podcast. We have been chatting so much about hiring and the hiring process and how we hire the right people for the role. Along those lines, we have this great resignation going on, or great renegotiation as to what's happening, when things happen, what do people want when they come to work. And in the last three podcasts, we talked about, this impact of an individual's values being aligned to the organizational values, and how over 80% of folks say values alignment from personal values to organizational values is really important for them to be successful in their role. We also learned that 14.6% of HR professionals are turning over, and that is the highest turnover rate per role of any role that is out there. So with us today, I have Dr. Mandolen Mull, and Dr. Mull has been on the podcast in the past, and she is the owner of Momentum, and we're going to talk about the great renegotiation and the impact that has when we are hiring new folks into our organization.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be talking about this because we really are seeing a total change in how we hire. And it's not so much driven from our side as employers. It's being driven by the employees, the demand of the market. So this is a really exciting time. I think that we're seeing, really a change in how work is being done.
Absolutely. So not only are we seeing a change in how work's being done, we have job seekers taking ownership. Their hand is in what they're doing. Yeah. So it's no longer about, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do.
Right.
It's going, hey, I'm going to walk into an organization and I'm going to have a very specific objective about what I want.
Right. Yeah, we're absolutely seeing this agency, right? Where people are saying, I know what I bring to the table, and I know what my parameters are in the where I work best, how I work best, what type of work feels fulfilling to me. And they're not really settling for less on that. And we know because of our organizations having these issues with turnover and having retention, but also not being able to recruit a lot of talent these days. That focus on retention means we really have to be having conversations of what is it that these people want and where are we aligning with that. One of the things that I've found when I've talked to a lot of HR lately is, decisions are being made in the back of companies of like employee wellness programs or benefit programs or things like that. The open enrollment decisions that HR managers make. But they're making decisions for a workforce that no longer is employed. And it's not attracting new talent.
Right.
And that's a really big deal. I was at a SHRM meeting recently and I asked everybody, who offers at least a 5% matching? And, of course, everybody raises their hands. And I said, of course you did, because that's what everybody does. But if somebody came to me and said, Mandolen, we would pay, we'd match 4%, but give you pet insurance. My dogs, I would be so happy with that. Right? And it's like, when was it that we really rethought what those things were to attract that kind of talent? Where are we really having that consideration? I saw a statistic earlier this week that said 10% of employees have been asked what they would like in a rewards program.
And isn't that amazing? Only 10%.
Right.
And yet, how do we know if we're attracting the right thing? And more importantly than that, as this, layoffs are happening and things are getting tighter with whatever's happening with the economy, how do we ensure we're spending our dollars? Because you can only spend $1 once,
right,
in the best way possible. And bringing employees in and engaging them in that conversation allows us to know we're putting our dollars to the best use.
And I see this all the time, right? We'll do like a Christmas party. And at the end, we'll go, well, we really think that the employees enjoyed that. That seemed like that went over well. Rather than prior to even beginning to plan it, sending out a survey to our employees and saying, here's what we're thinking about. Here's what we're considering. Would this be of benefit? Would this be something that you would find to be, worthwhile? We're really not looking at our employees as internal marketplaces. We talk about creating things like shadow boards or succession planning, mentoring programs, and I love all those things, but we still really forget about the internal talent we have and the agility that could have within our organizations. And we're not doing internal market research on our people. We'll do employee engagement surveys or these kinds of things. And it's really missing the mark of what is it, why do you continue to like to work here? What is it that you want out of us as an employer when we're considering new benefits packages? What would you prefer?
Right.
If we're looking at a recognition program, what would you prefer? We're not asking our people those questions.
Right. What's so interesting is I had a call with a client this morning and she runs a law firm. And, the problem that she presented to me with is I want to, keep my employees happy and engaged. And I think I'm doing everything that they want. I'm super flexible, so I think I just need to raise their pay rate. And I said, okay. I said, so what's your staff really want? And she goes, well, they keep cutting their hours. So I don't know. And I said, well, there's two kinds of conversations that we can have here. Right. One is, are you meeting your business results right now? And her answer was no. She goes, I don't have enough billable time based on what they're providing to me for availability. I said, okay, so what are they telling you is the most important thing? She goes, flexibility. I said, so how are you providing flexibility? She goes, I'm providing flexibility with less hours. I said, okay, so what are ways that we can provide flexibility that still keeps your billable hours up? Because if you want X number of billable hours and that's been cut in half, how do we do that? She's like, I don't know. I said, well, what if we said there's core working hours and you could work these other hours at any time you want?
Right.
So one of them is grandma, right? And grandma wants to be with her grandkids who, during the day. And I said, so if you're making it mandatory that all of her hours are between 8 and 5, is she available for you to do an and both of meeting her personal needs and meeting your needs as a firm?
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
So when we start to dig into getting creative, what are other ways we can meet an and both objective?
Absolutely. And I have a client who is a results only work environment, right? And they've been highly successful with that. They have very little turnover, really high profitability, just they get it done really well. And it requires a lot of accountability. But what they say is, we do not focus on, we don't manage people, we don't manage time, we manage the work.
Right.
And the work either gets done or it doesn't, right? And so it's that idea of, what do you really care about, employer? Do you care that your results are getting obtained and your people are happy? Or do you care that they're fitting into this little standardized box of Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, watching the clock and, right? We lost a lot of track of our priorities. Right. And so sadly, then you start to see people really focusing on the wrong things. And so we're not having those kind of conversations. And so I love that you gave that advice to her. Where can we create those ands? Because I think it comes back to that.
Right. And I think the other side of this is, I love the question of what am I not seeing from where I sit, right? And really getting curious about what am I not seeing? And here's the thing, she's not doing anything wrong because she's never been taught or given permission to think outside of this box, especially she grew up in a huge law firm. That's all she knows. So for somebody to come in and say, well, why do we have to do this? Oh, it's never occurred to me. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
The key here is, have it occur to you.
Right. And that's such a great point. I mean, we are raised like in a K through 12 kind of society where we learn in an if then. If you do this, then you get these results. If then. And we just keep on doing that all the time. And we don't really start to break loose of that. And so it seems radical and it seems difficult and uncomfortable to start to consider these other things. Both. And then you start to see these giant, massive light bulbs go off in people's heads of like, of course, why didn't I think of that? That seems brilliant. And they get really excited. And, Tracy, the thing that I try to tell people all the time is you and I, we do not get to assign what is valuable to someone else.
Right.
So we have to start asking them, what is it that is valuable to you? And then how can I create that environment that's inspirational and valuable to you, that allows you to bring forth your best self so that we can all meet our collective, sustainable, successful goals.
Right.
Yeah.
In this, I started today saying, hey, 80 some percentage of individuals, want to work at organizations where their personal values are aligned to the organizational values. And the same goes into the results-oriented work, right? Mm-hmm. So often as organizations, we are not sharing what our business goals are with our staff. So how can we ensure that goal attainment truly cascades through the organization and we have a want match between what the employee wants and what their goals and objectives are and what the organization wants and what their goals and objectives are? Because if those two things don't match, we're going to have individuals that are at work because they have to be and they're not engaged.
I would say that's the majority of our workforce, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, sadly, because I don't think that a lot of employees know what their personal values are. I think they know how to, and I know I personally had to sit down and do this about a year ago, where I thought, what are my personal values? I could recite all of the employers I worked for, all of their core values. I could state them off. And I went to Google because I'm, everybody else. And I went to Google and looked at different personal values. And I had to really do some investigative work on that.
Right.
I thought at first, honesty, of course, I want honesty. And then I thought, no, I really don't like honesty, because honesty is one of those, well, Tracy, if you had asked me, I would have told you. And I don't want to have to know what questions to ask. And so, I went with transparency. And one of the things that I think organizations focus a lot on, and it's their core value, is honesty. And there's that, the curse of knowledge. The top leadership knows what their goals are, knows what the plans are, all of these things. And they're being very honest with their people, but they're not necessarily being transparent. Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily being forthcoming with information because they don't realize that the employees have no idea what's going on in these other. And so there's such a misalignment. I don't think that there's malicious intent here. I think there's just misalignment.
Right.
And again, the employees don't know the right questions to ask often. So we're kind of not, it's really a communication issue. It could also be a little bit of a courage issue of should I ask these questions? But I think when we talk about the personal value of the employee and then the values of the company, we have to really think about how do those align, but what do those words really mean? Mm-hmm. Are they just these buzzwords that we put out, or have we lived with them, really embodied them, and understand how we're articulating them?
And one of the questions that I love to ask when we're looking at values is, what is the unintended consequence of having this as a value? Mm. Meaning, what's the other side of this? Because we're only looking at the positives. What's the other side of this that could be a positive and or a negative? Yet, how could this also be interpreted? Because so much of it is about how it is perceived. And that's where that definition of our core values becomes so incredibly important. And then the next step in that is, how does that tie into what is most important to us as an organization, which typically, unfortunately, is not your mission or your vision.
Right. And another thing, I hear oftentimes like organizations use discipline or accountability as like their words for values. And sadly, many people mistake those as adversarial words rather than developmental words and something that can actually be very growth oriented. But again, it comes down to, I know what it looks like to me, but I don't know what it looks like to you. And until you and I start discussing, what does this word really mean to you? What is it? How is this valuable to you? Or is it not? What is your perception of it? Until I begin to understand that, we're talking about two totally different things.
Right.
And I think that's where organizations right now haven't historically had to really dig into that kind of world and help people with that and make it very granular. And now we're having to. And that's kind of part of that great renegotiation.
Yeah. And I think with the renegotiation, what is being asked is two things. Define what this means to you.
Right.
And let's calibrate and make sure that that's what means to everyone.
Exactly.
Right. So we have a definition and a calibration that is a huge piece of that. So when we go to interview and hire, guess what? If we have not defined it and calibrated it to begin with, we're having a misalignment of folks coming into thinking, hey, a role's one thing when it's completely different.
Oh, yeah.
Thinking that, you know what, the work norms here are one thing when it's not, or we've got these little pockets of culture that it's okay here, but it's not okay there.
Right. Right.
And that leads to all sorts of HR compliance issues and nightmares because we've got one group saying, hey, this is okay. And another group's going, that's discrimination. That is not okay.
Right.
And so we dig into these really deep wells that things spin out negatively very fast. And how can we solve it? Transparency,
right?
Defining and calibrating.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think we've got. I think organizations have to get better at really making that a cadence.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, you know, as we kind of dig through, what does this look like from a leadership level, both from an organizational executive leadership level into the department leaders and into the HR leaders? How do we tie those three things together? And what does that look like? For me, what I see so often is what are the stories we're telling and what are the stories of what we're stepping into?
Right.
Where do we see our organization? And can we name that in a story that then aligns back into these defined expectations and roles? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I love that. I mean, I think we live in a standardized world these days, right? And we've got to get back into understanding the customization of the humans that we're working with. Imagine that. And I get why, again, like I said, it's that if-then upbringing that we all kind of had, that learning style that we had that really standardized so much that we do. But understanding that having from a managerial perspective, an HR perspective, and an executive leadership perspective, we've got to really start to understand what is it that our people want, what are their needs, and how are we aligning to meet those things. There definitely is that and that you're talking about, right? That exists. It doesn't exist in the constrained structural ways that we've been doing work. I mean, the reality is we are operating in a work system today, aside from row environments or things like that, that was designed, in the 19th century to work well in the 20th century, when here we are in the 21st, and it's not working for people anymore. And, you tell, 18, 19-year-olds, well, welcome to adulting. Everybody hates their job. No. Right. So many people's lives we're talking about here.
And that's so funny because before we recorded this podcast, I did a mock interview training with high school students, and we were developing the resumes today. So we weren't doing the interview, we were developing the resumes. And we spent a lot of time on what is their objective. You know how many of those kiddos told me their objective was to make money?
Right.
And I said, sorry, I'm not going to hire you if you tell me your objective is to make money, because you're not going to be engaged in the work. Right. What lights you up?
Right. Exactly. And sadly, it's not a nefarious comment from that. It's literally what they know. Right. You just get a job and go make money. Like that is the expectation.
Right.
And so there's not that well of depth underneath it that says, hang on. This needs to light you up. This needs to be meaningful. This needs to be valuable to you. It's only your life we're talking about here. It's only 90,000 hours of your life, And so when we start to really break that stuff down and look back on how are we addressing that? How are we creating value for people in a way that is in their currency?
Right.
Not in the currency of a dollar that exists, but in the currency that really resonates with them and refuels them. And that does lead to that engagement and retention and things that, we all want. But it also has to be authentic in how we do it. Otherwise, people feel like they're being manipulated in a negative way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, engagement is a tool. It is not the end all byproduct. It's what gets us more outcomes. But engagement in and of itself is a good thing.
Absolutely.
And so being able to foster that and develop that for people, I think has to be unique to the individual. Mm-hmm. And so it's understanding what is it that these job seekers individually are wanting. And do we have a good sense of what we can offer people versus just here's our benefits package. Here's, on Fridays you wear jeans or whatever that, right? Do we really know what value in the variety of value that we can offer job seekers?
Right.
It's not just, we've got, this one thing, beanbags or whatever. You've got to know, again, people, we don't get to assign what's valuable to folks. So are you offering enough variety of value, enough versatility there that you're attracting people coming in saying, I really like this. I could take or leave that. Mm-hmm. But you've got enough that you're hitting enough of those angles to bring people in.
Absolutely. So as we start to land the plane here, what's a key takeaway that you have for our executives listening in today?
I think what it really comes down to is you do not get to assign value to other people or what they find value in. Right. And so you've got to ask, right? Why, what is valuable to you? What matters to you? When was your last win? What made you feel good? When did you last feel like you were in flow? What felt like meaningful work to you here? What really lights you up? Going back to that, what is it that you value and how can we craft a pathway that works for all of us towards sustainable success? Not just success, it has to be sustainable.
Right.
And it will not be sustainable if we're not meeting the values and needs of our people.
Right. Absolutely. And then when we look at a key takeaway for HR, I'm just going to kind of jump in and say for HR, creating the system that makes that easy for your executives to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Create that system, that process where that feedback exists, where those communication channels exist, right. And understanding that at the end of the day, everybody has to be on the same team.
Right.
And it can't just be words on a wall. It can't just be words on a job description or, right. It can't be that by hook or by crook, we're going to get talent in here. We really have to have the depth.
Yeah. So if I'm going to summarize this quickly, our conversation today, it is know your people.
Right.
Offer what your people are wanting and not just your internal people, but what is specifically needed and how is that specifically aligned to your industry, your organization, your community.
Right.
And then go ahead and define, I think this is so important, define what that looks like in the job, in the culture, in the team, define what that looks like, and then cascade that down together so that you've got the transparency and the definition and the calibration.
Absolutely. I love it.
Awesome. So thank you so much for joining us in this episode of our podcast. And I'm going to have links to Mandolen's information, and she has some amazing training programs with Momentum. One of the things we talked about today is, how do we determine what we want as employees? I have a free career goal setting workshop that I'll also put in there. So if you're going, I don't know what I want, and I have to know what I want before I walk into an interview, there is a workshop that I will have in the show notes for you. And of course, our Hire program starts on July 11th. And so if you're looking to, how do I build a foundational HR department from the ground up that will turn into a transformational HR department, please join us for that cohort-based program. Do you have any leadership programs you're offering soon?
Yes, they will be starting. We'll launch it May 5th for people to start enrolling. And then in June, I will start 3-week classes starting every month.
Amazing. Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.